A woman is missing, and a family is frantic.
This case was very complex from the beginning because the clues led in many different directions.
The clock is ticking, and police must retrace her every move to discover the truth.
Often it's the small things that solve an investigation. And in this case, the key to solving the puzzle was human nature.
Melbourne, on the coast of Florida. This is a quiet town. Until police receive a missing persons call.
At about midnight, a man named Rogers Mansfield called the police to report his 63-year-old wife, Lillian, hadn't returned home. Rogers Mansfield reported to the police that he and his wife had been to North Carolina to their cabin and had just returned that evening. When they arrived home, his wife had realized there was no food for the breakfast, so she went to the store.
And she hasn't been heard from since.
Mr. Mansfield told us that he had driven around for a couple of hours, and that's when he located the car at the Melbourne Square Mall. But there was no sign of Lillian, and he returned home and called the police.
And Detective Lawson learned something else.
The family had told us that she was also wearing her jewelry, but that was not unusual for her to wear that type of jewelry, and they weren't concerned in that regard.
But to police, this angle may be important.
She was wearing about $6,000 worth of jewelry. We thought it might be something of a motive for a robbery. It was important that we find Lillian Mansfield as soon as possible. Every minute that passes by in a missing persons case is 1 minute toward danger. Since her car was found at the mall, that was the most logical place to start.
The mall is only a few blocks from the Mansfield's house, and Lillian's car is right outside. Police seal the area and examine the vehicle.
No doubt. We were looking for any types of trace evidence, such as hair, blood, or fibers, that would tell us maybe what had happened, if anything had happened in this car. We looked through the inside of the trunk of the car. We didn't find any packages or anything to indicate that she had been shopping, and weren't able to locate any of her jewelry.
A CSI team looks for evidence invisible to the naked eye.
We checked the car. There was no forced entry, there was no blood in the car, and there was no signs of any latent prints that didn't belong in the car. But there was no indication of foul play at this point.
But upon closer examination, police make an unusual discovery.
One thing we did notice in the car was the fact that the front seat had been pushed back. And this was kind of unusual only because we knew that she was a short woman.
Could someone else have been driving? If so, there may be a witness.
We talked to passersby that were in the parking lot at the time, but no one had seen Lillian. We decided to take our investigation further and go into the mall and talk with some of the shop owners.
But no one had seen Lillian that night. Police brief Rogers Mansfield and his family and learn more about Lillian.
In talking with the family, we learned a lot about her. She was a well-respected, very dignified lady. Her daughters told us that she loved to read books. Specifically, she loved to read Mark Twain.
Lillian and her jewels are missing, and investigators are running out of options. Except for one.
Profilers help in a great deal with something like this because you want to look for is why is this person missing? And profilers give us some direction to head.
Lawson calls in Special Agent Dale Hinman.
When I first heard about this case, there were a number of possibilities. Perhaps she was abducted, or maybe she just ran away.
But Agent Hinman soon comes to a surprising conclusion.
The initial police reports indicated that Lillian Mansfield was a missing person. Based on the preliminary information, it didn't appear that robbery was the primary motive.
What is the real reason Lillian Mansfield disappeared? Special Agent Dale Hinman wants to see where Lillian's car was discovered.
In any missing persons case, it's always important to visit the last place the person was seen. It helps us paint a picture of what may have happened.
And here we are, Dale. This is the mall. This is the location the victim's car was found in. According to Rogers Mansfield, Lillian drove this car to the mall, and this is the last place she was seen, or at least this is the last place we know that she should have been seen. We've already contacted the news media. We've explained to them we've got a missing persons case.
Doesn't it seem odd to you that she would not even enter their residence to inventory what's in the kitchen and then drive directly over here, passing several stores in the process, and then come to this location?
Absolutely. I mean, it makes us wonder why she would do something like that at that time of night.
Was there any indication that someone had forced their way into the vehicle?
No, and apparently, as you can see, the locks are all in place and the doors haven't been jimmied. This car is in pristine condition. We checked the inside of the car. We didn't find any kind of latent prints. We didn't find anything that which indicated foul play to us.
Any packages as if she'd actually been into this mall area shopping?
No, and in fact, we checked the trunk. There was none in the back seat, and there's no receipts.
Is this a position the victim would drive the car in?
No, not normally, because she was such a short-statured woman that the seat would normally be more forward toward the steering wheel.
So it's a possibility that someone else drove the car to this location. Based on everything I've seen so far, there's 3 separate and distinct possibilities about what could have happened here. The first being that the victim ran away for some reason. The second is that somebody approached her in the parking lot to rob her and killed her and moved the body and brought the car back to this location. Or third, that none of this happened at all and that everything about this is a staged crime scene. What kind of person was the victim? Was there any trouble going on in her marriage where there'd be any indication that she would want to run away?
Initially, our investigation hasn't given us any indication that there was a reason for her to want to run away. She loved her family, she loved being close by, she just loved being around her children.
Investigators next focus on the second possibility, robbery.
Rogers Mansfield told us that when she left to come to the mall last night, she was wearing a lot of her expensive jewelry. Possibly she may be a victim of a robbery.
Statistically, that would be the least likely, because most times when a robbery occurs in a parking lot, if the victim resists and the person feels like they have to struggle with the victim and harm them, usually they just leave them right at that location.
And this brings investigators to the last scenario.
The seat in this position, it seems possible that maybe somebody else drove this car over here. It's possible that nothing that we've seen so far actually happened, and that everything about this is a staged crime scene. Sounds like this case is a lot more complex than just a missing persons case.
If this scene was staged and Mrs. Mansfield's vehicle was simply placed at the mall, it was important to look at the last place she was actually seen. Since she had just returned from North Carolina, something at the cabin may explain what had happened.
Investigators contact local police in Murphy, North Carolina, a small mountain town. Police search the woods outside the cabin for any sign of Lillian's disappearance. But there's no trace.
The police photographed the cabin, but there was nothing to indicate what may have happened to Lillian. Everything appeared to be neat and tidy, and to the police, nothing appeared to be out of place.
But the neighbors speak of something that is out of place.
In our interviews, the people that knew the Mansfield all described them as a very close family, seemed to be well liked. However, when talking with some of the people in Murphy, we began to learn that he had been seen with another woman.
The woman's name, Edna Gibbs.
Rogers had been seen with another woman, but they only had her name. The police needed to hear her story.
Investigators bring Gibbs to the station for an interview. Edna claims she and Rogers started out as co-workers in Florida, but their relationship soon developed into something more.
We discovered she worked with Rogers, and they had been seeing each other for about 6 months.
To what extent did the relationship get involved to?
We realized we were in love with each other, and we would like to be with each other if we could.
Edna told us in our interview that Rogers had said that he had planned on divorcing Lillian. There was something that may be involved here that was very suspicious. The fact that there was another woman who may be responsible for her missing.
Police turn up the heat, but Edna remains cool.
Did you have anything to do with the disappearance of her?
No, I did not. I know absolutely nothing about her disappearance, and I had absolutely no involvement in it.
Edna's interview sounded believable, and she denied any knowledge of Lillian's disappearance. And then something happened that changed the direction of the investigation.
We got a call from a man in Port Orange who worked at a filling station, Claude Alford. Alford told us that he had just seen Lillian Mansfield.
Could police be on the wrong track? Could Lillian Mansfield have staged her own disappearance?
It had been several days since Lillian Mansfield was reported missing, but then the police got a call that she had just been spotted by a gas station attendant.
Mr. Alford said that he had seen the newspapers, and he thought he recognized Lillian from the missing persons photo. He said that a woman fitting Lillian's description had come into his service station looking for work. He told her that he didn't have any work at the time, so he dropped her off at the bus station.
Detective Lawson shows Alford another photo, trying to confirm the match. The more Lawson talks to Alford, the worse it gets, and the more clear it becomes.
He determined it wasn't the lady that he had talked to at that time. This was a case of mistaken identity, and it didn't help us in any way to locate Lillian Mansfield.
A good lead has gone nowhere. Detective Lawson briefs Agent Hinman on the latest findings. They begin with Edna Gibbs.
What type of person is she? Does she have any type of criminal history or criminal past?
No, actually, she doesn't have any criminal history at all. We've talked with Edna, and she's told us that she was under the impression that Rogers was getting a divorce from Lillian.
Well, theoretically, a person like her would have a motive, but if she doesn't have any criminal sophistication, it's unlikely that she would have come up with the idea to stage the scene where the vehicle was recovered to make it look as though a tall person or perhaps the victim's husband put the car in that location. The vehicle was recovered.
With the help of criminal profiler Dale Hinman, police rule out Edna Gibbs. But if Rogers never admitted his affair, what else could he be hiding?
I know in the reports you mentioned that the Mansfield had rental property and also the cabin in North Carolina.
Exactly.
Well, the research has shown that offenders travel in a place that they're very familiar and very comfortable with.
Agent Hinman knows that if Rogers was involved, the clue to solving this case may lie somewhere between Florida and North Carolina.
When people are such creatures of habit, they're most likely to continue to stop at and go to places that they're comfortable and familiar with. Have you looked at all the travel receipts and the gas receipts on where they've gone?
What we're planning on doing is retracing the route that Rogers Mansfield told us they took to go to Murphy, North Carolina. We'll be stopping at restaurants and gas stations and other shops that they supposedly stopped at on their way to Murphy, North Carolina.
And that way you can find out whether they were together or whether Rogers was alone.
We retraced the route between Melbourne and Murphy, North Carolina. It had been several days since Lillian had been reported missing. Our optimism about finding her was quickly turning to pessimism.
Rogers told the police that they drove straight home from the cabin in North Carolina, but Lillian's daughters mentioned that her parents always stopped at a specific diner on their way to and from the cabin in North Carolina. That seemed like a good place to start.
The diner is located in Jacksonville, just a few hours from Melbourne. Lawson shows the waitresses a photo of Lillian Mansfield and is shocked by the reaction.
They recall both Rogers Mansfield and Lillian stopping in on their way north because they had stopped in so many times, they were sort of regulars there. On their return trip, The manager only recalled seeing Rogers Mansfield coming in the restaurant. It indicated that at least she had gone up toward North Carolina, but she had not returned.
We thought it was suspicious that Rogers was seen eating alone at the diner. We decided to take another look at the evidence. The police had processed Lillian's car as part of the crime scene. We all thought it would be a good idea to take a look at Rogers' car as well.
Police tow Rogers' car to the crime lab. CSI Scott Dwyer looks for anything out of the ordinary. And finds something that will move this investigation into high gear. It's been 6 days since Lillian Mansfield's disappearance. But crime scene investigator Scott Dwyer has found evidence that may shed light on what happened. He calls Agent Hinman and Detective Lawson.
We brought in Roger Mansfield's vehicle. The interior was processed and no evidence or items were found of significance inside in the front compartment and the rear compartment. But we did find something of significance in the rear trunk area. Using the alternate light source, I was able to find light-colored or grayish-type hairs that were consistent with human hairs.
Did the victim ever drive her husband's car?
Lillian wasn't known to drive this car. She had her own car, and he drove this car himself to work, and so she wouldn't, as far as we know, drive this car at all.
So it wouldn't be unusual to find her hair in the front of the car because that would mean that she was a passenger in the vehicle, but if she wasn't known to drive the car or take it anywhere, there's no reason for her hair to be in the trunk of the car. Well, that's really suspicious, and that really conflicts with his first report to the police department that his wife was missing, and since she's still missing, he needs to be talked to again.
Definitely.
The hair is sent to the lab for DNA analysis. Rogers Mansfield is brought to the station.
We were convinced that Lillian Mansfield had been the victim of foul play, and we were all confident that Rogers Mansfield was involved. But once he hired a lawyer, the police were prevented from having any further contact with him. So police came up with another strategy. They asked Lillian's family for help.
Investigators show the family pictures of the car at the mall and the cabin in North Carolina. Police are curious if anything looks out of the ordinary, and their curiosity pays off.
Rogers was a creature of habit, and he always stopped at the same diner. But Lillian was also a creature of habit, and she always cleaned in the same manner.
As I described the inside of the cabin, they were telling me that was not the way the mother would have left it. Lillian would have changed it, would have cleaned it differently. The way that she would have vacuumed, you would not have seen vacuum tracks in the carpet.
Lillian always cleaned the cabin herself, but the photos made it clear this time she didn't. The vacuum tracks indicated that Rogers may have been covering his own tracks.
The family decides to confront their father.
They needed closure, and through these conversations and continually talking to him, he began to relent.
Rogers told his daughters that they had gone to North Carolina and that he and Lillian had gotten into an argument over a divorce. He told them that he had apparently blacked out, and when he came to, Lillian was lying dead on the floor.
Police now have their answer. Lillian Mansfield isn't missing. She's dead.
Then Rogers told his daughters that he placed the body in the trunk of his car and drove to Hannibal, Missouri, where he buried their mother. Hannibal is significant. Rogers claimed that he buried Lillian there because Hannibal was Twain's hometown. But Hannibal was more significant to Rogers because that was his hometown too, and he didn't think anyone would search for her there.
But his confession leads investigators straight to her. A week after Lillian goes missing, Rogers Mansfield is arrested for murder. At trial, he is sentenced to first-degree manslaughter. Edna Gibbs, Rogers Mansfield's lover, is cleared of any complicity in the crime.
Rogers Mansfield betrayed his wife. Then in an act that was motivated by greed, he killed Lillian so that he wouldn't have to split what they had earned together. But human nature dictates that people are creatures of habit, and Rogers Mansfield stopped at the same diner one time too many.